And welcome back to the Left of the Game podcast. I'm your host, Reed Napper. It is Tuesday, February 18th, and welcome in. We have a jam-packed show for you today. Some of our topics we'll be talking about today: the Power Four sleepers in each of the Power Four conferences. Some predictions I have for some sleeper teams that may be able to shake up those conference races. The Big Ten and SEC controlling the college football playoff going forward, and my Big Ten tier list. That is all coming up on this episode of Love for the Game. To kick off this episode of Love for the Game, we're going to be talking about a recent report that came out by Ross Dellinger over the weekend for Yahoo Sports, talking about the Big Ten and SEC's kind of stranglehold on the college football playoff now. The SEC and the Big Ten are actively discussing an expansion of the college football playoff to include 14 to 16 teams. This would include the SEC moving to a 9-game conference schedule, exclusive media rights for those two conferences, exclusive scheduling rights for those two conferences. So you'd be seeing, say, Michigan and Texas play again a lot more. You'd be seeing Penn State and Alabama play a lot more. And this could be huge for college football going forward. You know, this is arguably the biggest story of the offseason as of right now. And the SEC and the Big Ten are easily putting their foot down, saying to the College Football Playoff Committee and those higher ups, being whoever they are, you know, basically saying that if you don't abide by our terms, allowing the majority of our teams from our conferences, the two strongest conferences in college football, to be at the forefront of your format, of your playoff, you know, then we're going to go make our own tournament. We're going to go make our own playoff. We'll take everyone with us, whoever wants to join. And, you know, that's basically the crux of it. So these discussions reflect the SEC and Big Ten's efforts to secure greater influence over the playoff structure, potentially at the expense of the Big 12 and the ACC and the Group of Five representative, whoever that happens to be. So the proposed model that they're looking to do is a 4-4-2-2-1 format, or 1-1, excuse me. So there'd be 4 spots granted to the SEC, 4 spots granted to the Big Ten, 2 for the ACC, 2 for the Big 12, a Group of 5 champion, and a at-large spot, which is most likely at all costs Notre Dame. So Notre Dame is essentially protected through this whole thing. And if this were to shake out, it would basically ruin conference championship weekend as we know it now. It would become sort of like a play-in. So your top 2 seeds from the Big Ten and the SEC would get first-round byes, or essentially automatic qualifiers into the playoff. And then your 3 and 6 from each conference and your 4 and 5 from each conference would do a play-in game to see who gets the 3rd and 4th spots of those two conferences. And there would also be a play-in for the second Big 12 spot and a play-in game for the second ACC spot. And the first thing that came to my mind when I read this story was this basically waters down the conference schedules. If you are a stronger team, say Oregon, for example, and you're going into your last 2 games of the regular season, 2 or 3 games of the regular season, and you know that you already have a top 2 spot secured, or say a top 6 spot, and it comes down to a play-in game, you could basically rest your starters for those last 2-3 games and basically treat them like bye weeks, essentially, just preparing for that one game or your bye that you get with the top 2 spots. I don't really think this is the format that they should go with. I mean, I personally think if they're going to do any automatic qualifiers for any conference, it should be dished out 3 apiece. So 3 for each of the power conferences, a Power 5 representative, or Group of 5 representative, and an at-large bid, which is most likely Notre Dame every single year. So I just think it could possibly trickle down also to how the college game is looked at and overseen. So, for example, there's no chance of a Cinderella team at all. And I made a TikTok about this at LFTG Pod 01 on TikTok. And there's no chance for a Cinderella or a lower tier team to be possibly win the national championship. This basically ruins the chance for any Cinderella or like road to glory type team to ever win a national championship. So, say for example, this year's Washington team, they don't finish in the top two spots for the Big Ten, but they end up in a play-in spot in the top six, and then they win that top spot, the top four spot based on the playing game that they have, and they end up as like a 10 seed or an 11, 12, something around that range. Then they have to go play, like a Texas or like some upper echelon team that they're completely not matched up well against. And I think this basically could lead to more blowouts that we've already seen in the 12-team format this past season. The whole first round was blowouts. And I think if they move to this model, you're banking on like the sixth best team in the SEC getting in the playoff. Now, should that have happened this past season? No, I don't believe so. Based on like your Ole Misses, Alabama, South Carolinas, I don't think they deserve to get in based on the resumes that they had. Now, could this happen in the future based on this format? Yeah, it probably would. You probably would get all these SEC and Big Ten teams basically just running the whole thing. You're basically going to get a SEC or Big Ten champion every single season. You're not going to see a Big 12 team. You're not going to see an Arizona State run the gauntlet again. I mean, they'll make the playoff. Yeah, that's good for them, but will they actually make it into the second round, into the third round? I don't think you'd ever see a Big 12 or ACC champion making a national championship run in this format. And it would trickle down to recruiting and NIL collectives and stuff like that. The lower tiered schools, so say, for example, in the Big Ten, like Maryland's not going to get top tier recruits consistently rolling in every season with this format. Every team's going to want to go to the best teams possible that will want to or be considered for those top four spots and be competing for those top four spots every season. Maryland, at least in the near future, in the next 5 years, is most likely not going to be competing for like those top four spots in the Big Ten if this were the model that we go to. So that's just an example of what I think could be like that. Conference championships, as I said before, would turn into a play-in game, essentially that weekend, the 3-6, the 4-5 matchups. Exclusive scheduling agreement, I've already said, between the conferences and exclusive scheduling rights between each other. So your non-conference schedule for each of these teams could feature one or two SEC Big Ten matchups, which would be good for the fan. I would certainly watch, don't get me wrong, but it basically waters down the non-conference schedule. So you're not getting all these lower tier teams, getting paid a decent amount of money to go play these bigger name teams, get on national television, and, sometimes pull out an upset. So say, for example, like Akron going to Ohio State, they get paid a ton of money to go play at the Shoe, and they're probably not going to win. They're probably like a 1% less than that chance that they beat Ohio State that day. But, they get the money that can go boost their program into the future. So you're also losing that side of it. And you also could see conferences quickly dying out because they want to go join the SEC and the Big Ten to get that better shot of having a top four spot. So say you get Big 12 teams moving into the Big Ten and ACC teams moving into the SEC. Now, Clemson and Florida State have already been trying to get out of the ACC. For example, you could see like Iowa State go into the Big Ten because they have that rivalry with Iowa. It's just stuff like that. I mean, you can see these conferences probably die out pretty quickly, in my opinion, and just try to make a run at it for an SEC or a Big Ten spot. So I'm not a big fan of it. Probably the best thing that comes out of this is the SEC moving to a 9-game schedule like everyone else. The Big Ten plays 9 games, Big 12 plays 9 games. I believe the ACC also plays 9 games. They're the only power conference to not play a 9-game conference schedule. So that's probably the best thing that comes out of this. And I'm all for automatic qualifiers again. I think that they're granted. I don't think first round buys are the way to do it, like for conference champions. I think if you win your conference, you should just be granted a spot in the tournament and then be seeded accordingly. So that's just my thoughts on it. And that was the breaking news over the weekend from Ross Dellinger. Big news. Probably the biggest news of the offseason so far is the story by Ross. This far in the episode, I really appreciate the support. Remember to follow us on X, Instagram, and TikTok at LFTGPod01. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe on the YouTube channel. And remember to follow us on Apple Podcasts as well. All support is greatly appreciated. Now, moving into our next topic, I will be giving my tier list for the Big Ten Conference, all 18 teams. We have 5 categories we'll be going through. National title contenders, the 8 to 10 win team season, possible playoff berth if you do get that 10-win season. The middle of the pack, a possible bowl game, so like a 6-win team, 5 and 7, around that range, and no chance at all. So we'll be starting at the bottom. The no chance, there's only one team we are putting in there, and that is the Purdue Boilermakers. They lost a ton of key players to the portal. The first one comes to mind is Thieneman, the safety that went to Oregon, and also Will Helt, the defensive end that went to Clemson. Fired their head coach. Purdue is really in a bad spot, and I don't see them bouncing back this season or at least next season. I do not see them making any chance at the Big Ten or the playoffs. Potentially a bowl game, maybe outside, but not in anytime soon will they be making a push. Now, for the bowl game category, we have Michigan State. Now, Michigan State, kind of a lackluster season under their standards that we've seen in the past last season. They could make a run at it this season, maybe make it to a bowl game. I don't believe they made it to a bowl game last year. I could be wrong on that front, but Michigan State, definitely the first team in this category. I think they're just below the middle of the pack teams that we'll be talking about in a little bit. Next up is Maryland. Now, as I said before in the SEC Big Ten discussion, I don't see Maryland making, waves into real competition in the Big Ten, for the next couple of seasons. I wouldn't even put them up at the middle of the pack. I mean, Mike Loxley has done a decent job there so far since coming over from Alabama. He's had some decent recruits come through, but I don't see them making a chance into the upper tier of the Big Ten just yet. But maybe in the near future. Next, we have Rutgers. Now, they had a little bit of hype going into last season. A lot of key returners coming back for that squad, such as like Kyle Monungai, for example. But I just don't think they made enough additions through the portal in their recruiting class to really make a big enough impact in the Big Ten this season. Next up, we have UCLA. They had a decent season last year, better by most standards of what people would expect UCLA to be. They competed against Penn State at Beaver Stadium, which was very impressive. They went on the road to Rutgers and beat them. But they didn't make any key additions in the portal or recruiting once again that really make me feel like that they could be at the upper tier of the Big Ten as of yet. So I'm putting them like Michigan State. They're right outside the middle of the pack grouping. But I don't think they'll be making a big enough push this season to be at the middle upper tier of the Big Ten. And now finally Northwestern. They did make some additions through the transfer portal. The first one comes to mind. They added a quarterback who could make an impact this season, but I don't really feel like Northwestern again is really at a place that could make a push to that middle tier or the upper tier of the Big Ten. They're kind of at the lower end of this bowl game range. I have them closer to Purdue than say UCLA or Michigan State. So but no one's as bad as the level as Purdue is. So Northwestern definitely could get up into that middle of the pack range by the end of the season, maybe, or by the start of the season if we did this tier list again. But I don't see Northwestern making that big of a push. Now for the middle of the pack section, first up we have Minnesota. PJ Fleck doing another outstanding job there last season. I believe they went 8-4, 8-5, something around that range. But another 8-win season. I think he's had 8 wins in every season there so far for Minnesota. Doing a great job for the Golden Gophers. Nebraska, Matt Rule continuing to build that program from where it started when he came in. Dylan Raiola is still there at quarterback. They definitely can be competitive. Key, that receiver they added, could be a game changer for Dylan Raiola on the outside. So there's definitely potential for Nebraska going forward into this season. I believe in Matt Rule's 3rd season now at Nebraska. USC. Now, I only have them in the middle of the pack because I trust Lincoln Riley going forward. Another solid recruiting class. I believe they finished 15th in the recruiting rankings this year, but they did lose a lot of key additions and a lot of key players to the portal, such as the Branch brothers. So I don't see USC, excuse me, making a push for the Big Ten title as of yet. I don't see him being in that upper tier of the Big Ten just as of yet, but maybe as of next year, we could see USC getting back to the glory that we know them to have. And finally, middle of the pack, we have Wisconsin. Lackluster down the stretch last season, but this is basically a make or break for Luke Fickell. I don't think they'll keep him around if they don't at least have a winning record, at least have an 8-win season, in my opinion. This is make or break for Luke Fickell this season for Wisconsin, I believe. So we will see. That is my middle of the pack section. Now going into the 8-10 win season, potential playoff berth maybe for some of these teams. First off, I have Illinois, who will be hinting at later for my sleepers. Illinois, a lot of key returning players. Luke Altmaier back at quarterback. Brett Bielema still there as head coach, doing a fantastic job with the Illini, coming off a 10-win season. They do have a favorable schedule coming into this season. Their toughest game is probably Ohio State at home, maybe at Duke on the road. But Illinois, definitely some potential to make some noise in the Big Ten this season for sure. A lot of key returning players, and especially a veteran quarterback like Luke Altmaier could definitely make a difference for the Fighting Illini. Next we have Michigan. I'm only putting them here because I don't know their quarterback situation as of yet. Now, I think no matter who is at quarterback, whether it is Bryce Underwood or Mikey Keene, this decision is basically based off of that. If Bryce Underwood is at quarterback for Michigan, I think they're in the national title contending teams, at least a playoff team in that upper tier right above them. But I think if Mikey Keene is their quarterback, I see him in that 8-10 win range. So this is really just based off that. If we do this list again, and by the time we know who will be the starting quarterback, say later in the spring or by fall camp, we will definitely. Michigan can fluctuate for sure. So this is basically just based on their quarterback situation as of right now. Indiana, coming off the greatest season in their school's history, arguably. Fernando Mendoza coming over from Cal to be their quarterback this season. I think it's a great addition. I just don't know if they'll be able to replicate the season that they had. I think they'll definitely be, at least a minimum 8-win team again. I do believe Indiana could be in that discussion for like that 5-6 range in the Big Ten. I just don't know if they'll be able to make a playoff push again like they did last season, but Fernando Mendoza, definitely one to watch. at quarterback for Indiana. I just don't know if they have the same amount of talent as they did last season to be able to make a real push. Washington. Now, there is a young quarterback there that got some game time at the end of last season. His name is escaping me at this current moment, but Washington is definitely one to watch going into next season out west. Jed Fish going into year 2 out there. I don't think he'll have the same season he had or regress. I think he'll only keep building as he did at Arizona, and I think Jed Fish is definitely one to watch with the Washington Huskies going into next season. And finally, we had the Iowa Hawkeyes, the most consistent team in the Big Ten, consistently. Kirk Ferentz going for 10 wins every other season. Iowa's, a tough place to play. Will they be able to actually get an offense this season? We will see. But they've always had consistent running games, really good defenses. So Iowa, continuously in that 8 to 10 win range. Great job by Kirk Ferentz and that staff, as always. Now, of course, as you see, our national title contenders, the reigning champion Ohio State Buckeyes, the Oregon Ducks, and the Penn State Nittany Lions. Penn State, going with the Ohio State model this next season, a lot of returning players, a lot of key returning players, especially Drew Auer, Nicholas Singleton, and Katron Allen on offense. This is James Franklin's best opportunity, honestly, to try and win a national title this upcoming season with how many returning players he has. So obviously, I think they're in national title contention. I think they're easily in the playoff spot contention. So we'll just have to see. We'll have to see going forward. Oregon Ducks, Dante Moore will be their starting quarterback, at least majority of pundits believe so, and so do I. But this is a Dan Lanning factor. Any team that is coached by Dan Lanning, in my opinion, is in a national title race, in a contention for the national title. So I definitely am banking on Dan Lanning. I'm banking on that class he's bringing in and the transfers that have come in for Oregon. Dan Lanning, one of the best in the country. So this is solely based on Dan Lanning. At this point, I fully trust him to be a productive coach and get Oregon right back to where they were last season. And of course, Ohio State, the reigning defending national champions. It was a lot of production on both sides of the ball. Matt Patricia coming in as defensive coordinator, promoting Brian Hartline, the offensive coordinator. I definitely think Ryan Day's extension is a sign that Ohio State's not messing around. I do believe they'll make the necessary moves and be able to get their guys back to the same place that team was last season. They might not be as recognizable, but, they still have Caleb Downs and Jeremiah Smith on both sides of the ball. So they'll easily be back at the top of the college football world. It's just, will they be able to go back-to-back for that national title race? So this is my Big Ten tier list. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And our final topic for today's episode is some Power 4 sleepers. So I'm going to give a sleeper team I believe could make some noise throughout the Power 4 conferences. And we'll be starting off with the Big 12. And my sleeper team for the Big 12 is Texas Tech. Now, Texas Tech finished 8-5 last season, 6-3 in the Big 12. They finished with the number 1 portal class, though, coming into 2025. And Joey McGuire, I think, is a really good coach. Hired Mac Leftwich, the offensive coordinator from Texas State, who averaged 40 points per game. Texas State, obviously, when you average 40 points per game as an offense, you know how to get your players in the right position. You know how to coach them well. So I think this is a great hire for Texas Tech, Mac Leftwich from Texas State. They also hired Sheil Wood from Houston as defensive coordinator. And now Houston last season led the Big 12 in fewest yards per game given up by defense. And they were in the top 25 nationally for total defense allowed. So I think that's another great get on both sides, both coordinators for Texas Tech. They have some key portal additions and returning players coming to the squad. Running back Quentin Joyner from Southern Cal. Leading receivers Josh Kelly and Caleb Douglas are returning. Adding a receiver in Reggie Virgil from Miami of Ohio and tight end Terrence Carter from Louisiana Lafayette. They returned 3 starters on the offensive line and a number of key additions and returners on the defensive side. It looks like a great roster on paper for the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Now their schedule, it's definitely favorable. Arkansas, Pine Bluff, Kent State, and Oregon State to start off the season before they get into Big 12 play at Utah. Some notable games on their schedule. Obviously, they open up at Utah. It's always tough to play at Utah. At Kansas State, going to Manhattan is always tough as well. At Arizona State also. Definitely tough for the Red Raiders in their schedule, but I definitely think they could be one to watch out for with the amount of players that they're bringing in from the transfer portal that are notable and the key returners that they have coming back. So our second team, we'll be going over to the ACC now, and the sleeper in the ACC for me is Georgia Tech. Now, this is a big factor by Brent Key, who I think is an absolute dog as a coach. 6-1 against ranked teams in the ACC. That's a great stat, and that's just a testament to his coaching ability and the staff that he has around him. So the key returning players for Georgia Tech: Haynes King at quarterback, returning for his senior season. Set to lead the offense once again with Jamal Haynes with him in the backfield. Now Haynes and King, that's funny because Haynes King. Anyway, they combined for over 1,500 rushing yards last season, so that's obviously huge returning for the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. And they return multiple starters once again on the offensive line, which is huge. So if they're able to replicate that 1,500-yard rushing backfield once again, that's obviously huge for them if they want to continue their success coming into 2025. AJ Hofford, JT Burney, and Malachi Hosley are a couple of key additions from the transfer portal. Hofford, an edge rusher transferring in from Clemson, which is a big strength of that defensive front. You get someone from that caliber of Clemson. It's huge to add someone to that caliber. JT Burney, a tight end from Cal, will add depth to the tight end position. And also help with some run blocking schemes to help out Haynes and Haynes King. Hopefully replicate their rushing attack from last season. And Hosley, another running back joining that backfield with Haynes King, could definitely add to the fold. Their schedule, their first test is actually in week 1 at Colorado. Against Deion's squad, it'll definitely be a test to open up the season. And then in week 3, they play Clemson at home. So not the easiest start for Georgia Tech as compared to some other teams in the ACC. But it is an ACC schedule. They also host Miami once again, and they host Georgia to end the season. So definitely some favorable games in the middle of that schedule. And I do think Georgia Tech is one to watch for in the ACC. Now, as I said in the Big Ten tier list, Illinois is my sleeper team for the Big Ten coming in the season. Returning players, obviously, Luke Altmaier at quarterback, entering his senior year, coming off a 10-win season for the Fighting Illini. Fantastic season by him in that offense. And the offensive line returns all 5 starters from the Citrus Bowl team that beat South Carolina. So I think it's a great job by Luke Altmaier and that offensive staff to try to continue that momentum from last season. Coming off 10 wins, that's a huge feat for Brett Bielema and that squad. So some notable portal additions: Leon Lowry, an outside linebacker coming in from Wisconsin; Aiden Napick, an offensive lineman coming from Idaho; and Ismail Conte, junior college transfer, anticipate to make a impact on that linebacking core. And they return 18 starters from the 2024 season. So I think it's definitely a team to watch out for in the Big Ten, Illinois, for sure. And finally, my SEC sleeper this season is Auburn. I definitely think they have a favorable schedule. They open up at Baylor, but they get some home games that are definitely more favorable to them. Georgia at home and Alabama at home in the Iron Bowl this year. Between Baylor and at Texas A&M and at Oklahoma, those are a few of their tougher road games, but they're definitely capable of winning them, I think. A&M will probably be their biggest challenge on the road. Oklahoma will be a very competitive game, but I think they could squeak that one out. And then I also think they could beat Baylor in week 1. But this is definitely, I think, a go big or go home season for Hugh Freeze for sure. Based on the 2025 recruiting class that they had, number 8 in the country, and 5-star rusher Jared Smith and Deuce Knight coming in, I definitely think Auburn is retooling to have a better season than they had last year. I think this is Hugh Freeze's best squad he's had there at Auburn so far. Jackson Arnold coming in at quarterback from Oklahoma. Eric Singleton, stud wide receiver from Georgia Tech, coming over. 754 receiving yards last season. Definitely will be a big help to that Auburn receiving core, And Chris Murray, an edge defender coming over from Sam Houston State, who had 5.5 sacks last season. So some strategic moves by Auburn, definitely loaded up in the portal. But also a top 10 recruiting class is nothing to mess around about. So I definitely think the Auburn Tigers are one to watch for in the SEC. And that'll do it for this episode of Love for the Game. I really appreciate you tuning in today. And sorry for the lack of output of content lately. I have been traveling. I'm currently visiting my girlfriend, as you can tell by the different backdrop. So I really appreciate all the support you guys give. Remember to follow us on X, Instagram, and TikTok at LFTGPod01. Like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube. And remember to follow us over on Apple Podcasts. I really appreciate all the support. Have a great day, everyone.